So, I want to read a quote. I guess if I read it, it is a quote. So I want to read a passage from a book I was just reading by chance. To be awake is to be alive. I have never yet a man who is quite awake. How could I have looked him in the face? We must learn to reawaken and keep ourselves alive, not by mechanical aids, but by an infinite expectation of the dawn. This is by Henry David Thoreau in about 1840. He was the poet and the writer who went to that pond called Walden and stayed there for a year and wrote about it. Thoreau. This is before there were any Buddhist centers in the United States. They're trying to figure out how to wake up, to reawaken. And I appreciate the fact that he said, we need to reawaken, which is sort of the confidence and the trust that we are inherently awake, and we often kind of slip into sleep or some type of, kind of unawakened state. And he said we don't have to do it by any mechanical aids, but by expectation of the dawn. Now, that expectation of the dawn. It's like, I know if I do this, awakening will happen. This really does lead to enlightenment. It's a trust in that practice and path that the dawn will, shine. So that sort of deep trust and faith you have, it's not in some other power. It's in that your practice will, lead to the dawn of your own life, to truly live. We've all felt times when, feel like this is it. This is what it means to be alive. And it's not necessarily that you're so happy and joyous, is it? Those moments when you feel like this is really what it means to be alive. Like you're stripped of all pretense and all pretension and all kind of external identity things. Like at a funeral, that kind of, you're not going to talk about your achievements at a funeral. Like, what does it matter there? Or at a birth. Like, you don't need to brag to the baby. Just the baby reminds you to be present. And then as we sort of develop our sense of self and identity, we feel like we need to buttress it. Buttress it is to support it with certain, as he said, mechanical aids. What are the mechanical aids? There's a sense of self, this identity we make. And we think, that's going to give me my sense of being alive. That's what he meant. We have to be awake is to truly be alive, but not through mechanical means and aids. So the mechanical aids are, all this identity, and it's not bad, it's not wrong. It's just that we mistake it for truly being alive. So you can use them, but it's not going to lead you to awakening to what it really means to be alive. And that's why people who, whether they are supremely successful and wealthy, it doesn't necessarily mean that they have that sense of being alive and I'm really, I'm here. Not to elevate poverty and lack of any material gain. The extremes are not the point here. The point is the question. What does it mean to be truly alive without depending on anything external? This is what Thoreau is asking. How can we be really alive? This is it. The pretense drops away. And you're face to face with the raw fact of your being here. Whether it's beautiful or terrible or ugly or painful. And our practice is a little kind of, encouragement of that courage to be. The courage to be without retreating and escaping into being something. Because when we want to be something, it's sort of like an escape from the courage to actually be nothing. It's kind of difficult. One of the things people really like about traveling, I enjoyed it. And usually in the East, this is what I remember from India, was that when you would meet people, the conversations were not about what you do. It just, that at least, I don't know, I haven't been there for a long time, so that's what I remember from my time in India, is that the conversations were not all about, like, what are you doing, and, you know, what kind of job you have, or what are you studying, and things like that. Like, not the normal things that we talk about after 2 minutes of meeting someone here. So what do you do? And, you know. And it's even more so in North America, where it's more like what's implied by what you do is sort of, you know, what's your salary level? That's the real way of judging. I mean, your job can be really boring, but if you're a high earner, you're a high value individual. So it's refreshing to go to places where that's not the main interest when you know, that's not the main judgment. And it's refreshing because it's letting go of that mechanical aid that Thoreau said. So back to our practice, which is, you know, how do we awaken? Which means, how can we find ourselves more alive in this moment? Because we can't postpone this. Literally, it's now or never. Because when you get to tomorrow's going to be now, right? So just logically, it can only happen now. So our practice really, this is where the Buddha came and sort of struck a thunderbolt to where we should be aiming. I'll just read from, he gave his teaching on mindfulness, and I wanted tonight to talk about right mindfulness. Mindfulness. We should put in neon lights. It's like such a popular word. And but the Buddha taught mindfulness as part of the Eightfold Path. It's part of the enlightened path. And he taught in a very specific way in what's called the Satipatthana Sutra, the 4 foundations of mindfulness. He taught the mindfulness, 4 frameworks of mindfulness. How mindfulness was applied in 4 aspects of your being alive. It was not a sort of just, I don't know what, but mindfulness in the present sort of, I would say, even commercial way is, I would say it's lacking a lot of the specific direction that the Buddha gave, which is really about awakening, you know. And we have to remember that, and that's where Thoreau said, like, it's the expectation of the dawn. Like, you got to keep that expectation. If you don't realize that the practices are to have like full awakening, you're missing something in your practice. It's not just to calm down. It's to fully inhabit your not being calm. Right? Can you fully realize not being calm? You know? Because in the Satipatthana Sutra, the mindfulness, 4 foundation mindfulness teachings, he really examines every level of mind and body that there is, bar none, without any exceptions. Which is saying this practice is not just about, you know, having this sense of peace and calm. I mean, that's a nice side effect, but that's not the intention. It's the expectation of the dawn. It shouldn't be the expectation of the calm, right? That's shortchanging yourself. You have to go the distance. So here's the Buddha gave his teaching to a group of people called the Kurus. And they lived in a place called Dhamma, which is this great name of a town. Think about a town, living in a town called Kama and Dhamma. Karma and Dharma. Welcome. Where else is the Buddha going to give a teaching of mindfulness except in a place called Karma and Dharma? I feel there was some later editing going on with these sutras, really, but perhaps not. So he says to the monks, they say, Lord, this is the direct path for the purification of beings, for the overcoming of sorrow and lamentation, for the disappearance of pain and distress, for the attainment of the right method, and for the realizing of liberation. In other words, the 4 foundations of mindfulness. Which 4? And then he goes on and teaches it. But that introduction is just giving us a sense of, he describes this in really very strong terms. Really strong terms, that this is not just let's be present with my cup of tea. This is, going to offer and lead to full liberation, purification of the mind, the whole thing. Really, that's quite an amazing introduction to the sutra. This is the way to do it. And so when we consider practicing mindfulness, we should have the dawn in mind. We should have full awakening. We should understand this is a practice. It was really, central. It's the heart of liberation in the Buddhist path. And if you take full liberation out of it, then it's not the Buddhist path, right? It really has to be about total liberation of suffering and purification of the mind of all negative states. That's the dawn. And that's the aspiration you should have. That's the aspiration you should have. Don't aim for less, even though it seems far away. Because this is really what it's about. You should have that in mind. So, the 4 foundations of mindfulness are mindfulness of body, okay, and there's a whole process of looking at the body. There's mindfulness of feelings, mindfulness of mind, and mindfulness of qualities of the mind. Those are the 4 foundations. Each one of those we could spend a month on, right? Which is possible, but not tonight. Because tonight's tonight. I just wanted to introduce us to the topic of mindfulness. That when we talk about mindfulness and when we talk about right mindfulness, what makes it right versus, not right mindfulness. Well, the Buddha also talked about mindfulness when he said being mindful of right intention and mindful of when there's a lack of right intention, being mindful of right view and when there's a lack of right view, being mindful of right action when there's a lack of right action, being mindful of right effort when there's lack of right effort, being mindful of right speech when there's lack of right speech, being mindful of right livelihood. So he went through actually all the Eightfold Path and said mindfulness applies to all of those as well. So mindfulness is sort of the background to the whole path. It's like the center, it's like the holding it all together. And then when the instructions of mindfulness are given, it's like with mindfulness of breath. You should place your attention on the breath. Notice when there's a breath happening, you notice that there's a breath happening. When it's a long breath, you are mindful that there's a long breath. When there's a short breath, you're mindful that it's a short breath. When there's a calming of the breath, you notice when there's calming. You're breathing in calming, you're breathing out calming. When there's stress, you're breathing in that there's stress, you're breathing out when there's stress. When there are thoughts going on, you're breathing in that there are thoughts, breathing out that there are thoughts going on. The breath then becomes a way to accompany and stabilize your attention so that you can pay attention to everything that's happening in your body without running around and starting to get pretty frantic. The breath is like this sort of, I remember, it's like, do you remember in the, did anyone study the Bible stories, Tanakh stories, Chumash? And when they were wandering in the desert, in the nighttime, there was like a pillar of fire. In the daytime, there was a pillar of cloud. And it would give them direction. Well, that's the breath in mindfulness. The breath is like your pillar of fire in the night and your pillar of cloud in the day. That will let you know where you should be paying attention and where you should be going. Right? So that you can observe all the states of the body that are changing and not get totally, happy or sad or have a lot of attachment or aversion because you have something else that's keeping you steady, and that's your breath. So mindfulness of breath is really what allows you and enables you to then observe everything else in the environment without getting carried away. Because a lot happens in the body, and when you start to include your breath, then you can bear with it. You might have a pain. Let's just keep it real simple, right? Let's say you have a pain, for instance, in your ankle, or in your back, or in your neck, okay? Or in your head, or wherever you have a pain right now. You notice the pain. Part of the mindfulness of the body is noticing that there's a pain, that there's a pain arising, that there's a pain staying, and that there's pain passing. But with that, we're breathing. With that, we're breathing. Mindfulness of breath is really something that accompanies all of it. And that's why breath is so central here. Part of the mindfulness of body is when we start to, part of the stages that the Buddha taught about mindfulness of body is all the body parts you may have. While we focus on the breath, your body is this really quite involved organ. And the Buddha pointed out a lot of parts of the body to actually be aware of, including some of them that we have aversion to. Mucus, tears, blood, nails, hair, spine, nerves, all things, your toes, your feet, your thighs. What's wrong with that? That's part of being alive. So when we're talking about to be awake is to realize that you're alive, it's actually a lot. It's actually a lot. There's a lot to observe and to accept. So there's all that as well. That's part of the mindfulness of body. And you may not be going through that in meditation, but I think that the way it is taught is not as a formal meditation, but mindfulness, as he goes on with mindfulness of body, he says now mindfulness when you get up, and when you, I'll just read this section where he says this. He says, furthermore, when going forward, he makes himself fully alert. When looking towards and looking away, when bending and extending your limbs, when carrying your cloak, your robes, when eating, drinking, chewing, savoring, when urinating and defecating, that's like defecating, when walking, standing, sitting, falling asleep, waking up, talking, remaining silent, he makes himself fully alert. So as we see here, mindfulness of body, we start sitting, we start with breath, and then it starts to be actually the way you live in the world. Now, mindfulness is no longer this is my meditation practice. Mindfulness is the way you live. It's the way you are in the world. And that's how we start to appreciate this as a great path, a really great path. Great meaning vast, that it actually includes every activity. So yes, you reinforce it through your formal practice, like saying this is where I'm going to be really aware of just how I'm distracted, right? When you do formal meditation, what's a benefit of it is to observe how much we're distracted. That's a really beneficial. I tell my students in my college classes that you really should appreciate your mistakes, because that's the only way you're going to learn. You're not going to learn from what you got correct. You're going to learn from the mistakes. So we're going to learn from our distractions more from just, I had a very uneventful and present meditation. Well, you should observe carefully how crazy your mind is. Like everyone's. That it's just always, wanting some stimulation. As Thoreau said, some mechanical aids. We all want some mechanical aids. Like, help me be present and alive. When we go to extreme, people get addicted to drugs and alcohol because those are like the ultimate mechanical aids to feel alive. Addictions are all about the desire to feel alive. So, we have a different way. And that's letting go of external aids. Saying that there's enough in my body, in my mind, and my activities to be fully awake in this moment. And in fact, if you ever find yourself bored, you're simply not observing. That's just the basic truth, is that there's so much to observe in any single moment. Even just the dynamics of your body and breath. That there's, boredom is just a state of mind that then becomes part of what you're aware of. It's another interesting fact. Basho had a wonderful haiku where he made a pilgrimage to Mount Fuji, and he got up there and it was cloudy. And he said, Mount Fuji, covered by mist. How interesting. Meaning he went all the way to Mount Fuji and he didn't see anything. So that's a template. That's sort of a model for our meditation. In your formal meditation, what are you going to see? But in your life, there's so much to observe. The Buddha gave us some direction here. But then you take it and you need to apply it to everything you do. Now, in case we're thinking that this is all fun and games, meaning, I'm going to enjoy my walking and my eating and drinking and even sitting in the toilet, I'll be mindful and stuff. He also, part of the mindfulness of body, and this is just the mindfulness body, was talking about and suggesting going to cemeteries and observing decaying bodies. That's part of the mindfulness of body instruction. Okay, and he goes through in different paragraphs all the stages of decomposition of the body. Here are the bones with flesh, here are the bones without flesh, here's like just bleached bones. It goes through all of that in order to observe your truth. The truth not just of what you are in impermanence, but also, really what are we observing when we see a dead body? Fear. You're observing your mind. You're not observing the body. That's like a mirror to your mind, And what you see is probably aversion. It would be for me. Like serious aversion. But I accept that aversion. I know that's a natural biological reaction. That I have a survival instinct to run away from death. I see that, and I'm actually going to sit with that. I'm going to sit with that fear. And with the body, which is, arousing that fear. Now, you won't always have the opportunity to do that, especially here in Israel. But when impermanence and mortality and aging and sickness come your way, in whatever form it is, that's part of our mindfulness of body. That really is. The mindfulness body is noticing your relationship to aging, sickness, and death. That's mindfulness of body in its essence. When he goes on to mindfulness of feelings is actually much more straightforward because it applies to everything. It's simply noticing attachment, aversion, and delusion in response to everything we interact with. So we start to appreciate that the four foundations of mindfulness are not like these different kind of stages that I'll do this and this and this, but rather mindfulness of feelings is noticing all the aversion or the rejection or negativity I have to something, and all the likes and attachment I have to something. So just say with the body, I can be sick. I was sick for a few weeks. Part of my illness was observing not just the pain, but my aversion to the pain. That's mindfulness of feeling. And then when I started to get healthy, I started to look forward to it and get happy. So I started to notice the happiness and attachment I had to health. That's part of mindfulness of body and mindfulness of feelings. Mindfulness of mind is when there are a lot of thoughts involved. And we kind of, are often taught that in meditation, to observe thoughts, But we should keep in mind that we're not saying, now I'm going to look at mindfulness of mind because I've graduated from, or, mindfulness of feelings and mindfulness of body. Or I've today I'll do mind, tomorrow I'll do feelings, yesterday I did body, and next week I'll do mind qualities. You see that it's an interwoven approach here. You have your body, you have your breath, you notice your breath. Okay. Right mindfulness is knowing how this all works together to make you really awake in this moment. You can't just look at body without also looking at your attachment and aversion you have to your body and what happens in your body. And it can be with anything. When you talk about eating, you have attachment, you have like and dislike to what you eat, and then you can notice a change as well. And then you have all sorts of thoughts about it, and stories, and memories, and expectations. That's mindfulness of mind going on in relation to the feelings of attachment and aversion, in relation to all the physical reality that you're living. So yeah, it's interesting to see them separately, but really it's one aliveness where the mindfulness happens. And you should aspire to really see it all. And then that's what it means, like, I'm alive. Body, feelings, mind, and then mind qualities. The mind qualities of mind happen, the Buddha taught as first looking at these 5 hindrances. The 5 hindrances he taught as, having a lot of sensual pleasure, having anger and hatred, ill will, having a lot of dullness, having a lot of restlessness, and having a lot of skepticism and doubts, and how that influences our state of mind and our choices a lot. That's one aspect of the mind qualities. That comes up. The next thing he taught about is looking at the 5 aggregates, that there's form and there's feeling and there's perceptions, and then there are thoughts and cognition, and then there's a sense of consciousness. That's the mindfulness of mind qualities. And he talked about mindfulness of the 6 senses, the sense faculties, which was sense of hearing, of touch, of taste, of what are the senses? Sight, smell, and thinking. Sense was thinking is one of the mind qualities. And then he went to the 7 factors of enlightenment, which are these wonderful qualities that you have, like rapture and joy and, all sorts of great things. I think there's something else. But when you get to the factors of enlightenment, I think you should be leading a meditation group and, opening a monastery and teaching the masses. So those 7 factors of enlightenment. But the truth is, even though I mean this non-jokingly, that the factors of enlightenment are part of your practice on a daily level. That when you do from a place of having a live awareness of your moment, have an experience of completion, of joy, of even rapture, of real tranquility. These are of deep peace. The sense of being really here is fantastic. And that doesn't mean, pleasurable or painful, but it means this is it. And you feel like this is everything. When you have that, you should really be aware of it. You should really be aware of it. Because it is a fruit of this practice. So as we see, when the Buddha, when the Buddha taught about mindfulness, even though in a lot of our sort of Western understanding of it, it gets boiled down to, and I'm not saying this is a bad thing, but the way mindfulness is generally taught, it's be aware of your present activity, mainly your breath. Be aware when you have become distracted from the activity, and make the effort to return to your original activity. That's how mindfulness is generally taught. Is mindfulness of what you're doing. Be present with what you're doing. Be aware, notice when you've left it, and bring your attention back to that. That's sort of the 3-pronged process that mindfulness is taught in most meditation teachings. That is good and fine. But when we take this seminal, meaning really central text, as the way the Buddha taught mindfulness, we see that, wow, it really is kind of a global approach to how we can be fully and truly, completely alive in this moment. So you should you should expect the dawn when you're practicing this, and not compromise for anything less, because that's really what this teaching has to offer. So one last thing I want to say about mindfulness is there's one story that the Buddha gave, one example, and how we should kind of take it seriously. About that, he says, imagine that you're in a town, and I think this is for the male monks, I guess, and you're in a town, and what they say was that there is and people start shouting out, the beauty queen is coming, and there's a beauty queen who's coming, and then there's a procession with a beauty queen, really like the most beautiful beauty queen, and then you hear people starting to shout and scream, she's singing, the beauty queen is singing, and then even further, she's singing and dancing, and there's somebody who comes and he really wants to, be aware, and he's walking and he hears this calling of the beauty queen is singing and dancing. And he's told to put a whole pot of oil on his head. And the oil is filled to the rim. And he has to carry the oil through this procession with everyone shouting, the beauty queen is singing and dancing. And behind this guy is a guard with a sword. And if a drop of oil spills from the pot, he will be killed. Now, how will that person proceed? How will he walk? And so the Buddha said, so you should know. This pot is like your body, and the oil is the mindfulness that you want through every part of you. And that to me is really interesting, because it wasn't so much the man walking, but it was the pot and the oil. And the oil needs to be, you should be so full of mindfulness, meaning we're not just mindful of like this one part, but it should be, a really immersive experience. Meaning to be alive includes everything. And to be aware and awake is to appreciate just how full and complete this life is without any mechanical aids.
Don't we need some mechanical aids? Because I know a lot of lives which are quite, I would say, in Hebrew, aluvim, which are not full, or not admirable. So I think maybe we need something to shape our life, to choose our life, to be really noble and admirable and full.
Like, can you give an example?
Yes, for example, someone who is not honest, who don't have any virtues. So I wouldn't say that his mindfulness will turn his life into something full and complete.
Oh, but remember that the Buddha taught that the mindfulness was applied to the other parts of the Eightfold Path. Are you mindful of right speech? Are you mindful of when it's not right speech? Are you mindful of, right view? Are you mindful when it's not right view? So the mindfulness here, that's why I'm saying it's not just, the way I said it was simplified in a lot of meditation teaching to like activity, distraction, return. Be mindful of the activity, be mindful of when you're not mindful, and then return to it. That can lead to a type of real, almost selfish, approach to it. Like, mindfulness will help me enjoy more. Like, I'll get more out of this experience. And, it really was as a sort of an underpinning, as a sort of foundation for all the other parts, all the other 7 parts of the Eightfold Path. I mean, that's why it was taught, like, mindfulness in the definition that was, given. So, yeah, for sure. But it's not mechanical, because it's the nature of your mind to be mindful. See, this is what I think is important. It's not a mechanical aid. Mindfulness is the nature of the mind, right? The nature of the mind is to be aware of being alive in this moment. Is to be conscious of this moment. Human conditioning pulls one out of this moment. But the nature of the mind is to be naturally present in this moment. So mindfulness is returning to a sense of, true nature. Right. So in a sense, we're trying to uncondition all the negative conditioning by saying this is not, this is not right. What do we mean by right and wrong here? Not right. Okay, real simple. Does it cause harm? Does it lead to pain? Does it lead to release of suffering and release of attachment? That's, the way we judge it, right? It's not an external law or rule. It's just, is this making me happy or unhappy? Is it making others happy or unhappy? Is this creating greater attachment and addiction or greater release and freedom? Well, it might take a while to see whether we're fooling ourselves or not, but generally, if you're committed to this path, then as time passes, it becomes more clear. Any other question? Don't be shy. So, I'll end with a story, if I could. There was a fisherman who would go out fishing with a straight hook. And the other fishermen would laugh at him and say, "What do you think you're going to catch with that straight hook?" And he would say, "I'm going to catch the biggest fish there is." And they would just laugh him off. Day after day, he would go out to the lake and fish with straight hook. And of course, caught nothing. And people would talk about this idiot fisherman and what he's doing, why is he doing this? And people would ask him, "What are you doing?" And he'd say, "I'm going to catch the biggest fish." And finally, the story reached to the palace, and the emperor heard it. He said, "I have to go ask for myself." So the emperor traveled to the lake, and he said to the fisherman, "So, what are you trying to catch? You have a straight hook." He said, "I'm going to catch the biggest fish there is." And he said, "No, you aren't. You don't have anything." He said, "Well, yes, I just caught you. I just caught the emperor." Mindfulness is a straight hook. Have a good night. So let's finish our half a minute of sitting. Let's breathe in and breathe out. And as you breathe in and breathe out, we can arouse some intention. May our practice tonight help purify our minds so that our lives will be of more benefit to all others. May we end suffering and realize true freedom.